She escaped her cruel marriage and entered a chamber, unaware the man beside her was a lord. Before we begin the story, leave a comment and let us know which city you're watching from, and enjoy and story. The chamber smelled of beeswax and old smoke, nothing like the stale wine and sour rage that had clung to my husband's quarters. I pressed my back against the heavy oak door, my breath coming in shallow gasps that seemed too loud in the silence. My fingers found the iron key I'd stolen. Borrowed, I told myself, though I knew I'd never return it, and I clutched it so tightly the metal bit into my palm. The pain was good, real. It meant I was still here, still breathing, still free. For now. The corridor behind me remained quiet, but I knew that wouldn't last. Gareth would discover my absence soon, perhaps when he reached for his wine and found no wife to pour it, or when he wanted someone to blame for whatever slight the evening had brought him. 3 years I'd spent learning the rhythms of his anger, the way it built like storm clouds before breaking over me in words that left no marks anyone else could see. Tonight, I'd finally run. The chamber I'd stumbled into was larger than I'd expected, lit by a fire that crackled in a stone hearth broad enough to stand in. Tapestries lined the walls. Hunting scenes worked in thread that caught the firelight and shimmered like something alive. This was a lord's room, surely. Perhaps one of the castle's honored guests. My heart hammered against my ribs. I should leave, find somewhere else to hide, but my legs trembled beneath my kirtle, and I wasn't certain they would carry me much farther. Just a moment, I promised myself, just long enough to catch my breath and think. I moved deeper into the chamber, away from the door, past a table laden with documents and a half-eaten meal. My stomach clenched at the sight of bread and cheese, reminding me I hadn't eaten since morning. Gareth preferred I take my meals after serving him, and tonight there had been no after. There had only been his hand reaching for me and my sudden, desperate decision to run rather than endure another night of his particular attentions. The fire drew me like a lodestone draws iron. I hadn't realized how cold I'd become during my flight through the castle's dark passages. I'd left without my cloak, wearing only the simple wool kirtle I'd put on that morning, blue, because Gareth said it made me look washed out and plain, and I'd learned to make myself as unnoticeable as possible. My hair had come loose from its braid, falling around my shoulders in waves that my mother once said looked like honey in sunlight. But my mother was 4 years dead, and there was no one left to speak kindly of me. "You should not be here." I spun toward the voice, my stolen key tumbling from suddenly nerveless fingers to the floor with a metallic ring that seemed to echo through the chamber. A man stood in the shadowed doorway of an adjoining room, one I hadn't noticed in my flight to the fire. He was tall, broad-shouldered in the way of men who train with sword and lance, dressed in a dark tunic that seemed to absorb the firelight rather than reflect it. I couldn't see his face clearly in the shadows, but I felt his gaze on me like a physical thing, measuring an intent. "Forgive me, my lord," I managed, though my voice came out smaller than I'd intended. My hands twisted in my skirts, an old nervous habit I'd never been able to break despite Gareth's mockery. "I did not mean to intrude. I will leave at once." But I didn't move, couldn't move, because now that I'd stopped running I had nowhere to go. Back to Gareth's chambers. Back to his hands and his words and the cold certainty that this was all my life would ever be. The man stepped forward into the firelight, and I saw his face properly for the first time. Strong features, stern but not cruel. Dark hair shot through with silver at the temples, though he seemed not much past 40. And eyes, gray as winter sky, that studied me with an intensity that made me want to look away, even as something in me refused to. He moved like a predator, all controlled power and certainty. Nothing like Gareth's stumbling swagger when he was deep in his cups. This man was sober, alert, and dangerous in a way that had nothing to do with rage and everything to do with capability. "You're bleeding," he said, his voice low and rough, like stone grinding against stone. I followed his gaze to my feet, where blood had seeped through my leather shoes and darkened the stone floor in small, damning spots. I'd cut my foot on something during my flight, a sharp stone or piece of broken pottery, but I hadn't noticed until now. The pain came rushing in all at once, sharp and immediate. "It's nothing," I said, though the room tilted slightly, and I reached out to steady myself against the nearest chair. The man crossed the distance between us in 3 strides, catching my elbow before I could fall. His hand was warm through the wool of my sleeve, his grip firm, but not painful, not like Gareth's grip. My husband's hands left bruises shaped like accusations. This man's touch was different, steadying, not restraining. "Sit," he commanded, guiding me toward the chair I'd been gripping. I sat, because my legs gave me no choice, and because there was something in his voice that suggested refusing would be pointless. He released my arm and moved away, returning moments later with a basin of water and strips of clean linen. He knelt before me, a lord kneeling before someone like me, and I stared at the crown of his dark head in shock. "Give me your foot," he said. "My lord, I cannot. You're injured. I will tend it." "Give me your foot." There was no cruelty in his tone, but neither was there room for argument. I lifted my foot with trembling reluctance, and he cradled it with surprising gentleness as he unlaced my ruined shoe and drew it away. His hands were warm, calloused, from sword work, careful as they cleaned the gash across my sole. I bit my lip against the sting of water on the wound, refusing to make a sound. Gareth always said I was too soft, too prone to tears and weakness. I'd learned to swallow pain, to make myself silent and small. But this man didn't seem to notice my silence. He worked with efficient care, his touch impersonal, yet somehow more intimate than anything I'd experienced in 3 years of marriage. "What is your name?" he asked, not looking up from his work. I hesitated. Names had power. Once he knew who I was, he would know whose wife I was. And then he would send me back. Everyone always sent me back. "Ilawan," I whispered finally, giving him the name my mother had chosen. Not the girl or foolish creature that Gareth preferred. "Ilawan." He repeated it, as though testing the weight of it. "I am Aldrich, Lord of Thornhaven. These are my chambers you've invaded." My stomach dropped. A lord. Not just any lord, but one important enough to warrant the finest rooms in the castle. Heat flooded my cheeks. "My lord, I truly did not mean—" "Peace!" He wrapped the linen around my foot with deft movements, securing it with a knot that would hold. "I asked your name, not your apologies. You've given enough of those already, I think." Something in his tone made me look at him properly. His gray eyes met mine, and I saw no anger there, no impatience, only a quiet assessment that made me feel exposed in a way that had nothing to do with fear. "You ran from something," he said. It wasn't a question. I nodded, not trusting my voice. "From someone," he amended, still watching me with that unsettling intensity. Another nod. My throat felt tight, my chest constricted. I wanted to look away from those gray eyes, but I found I couldn't. He released my foot and stood, moving to the table where he poured wine from a silver pitcher into 2 cups. He returned and offered me one. "Drink. You're pale as parchment." I took the cup with both hands to keep them from shaking. The wine was good, far better than anything Gareth served. It was warm and rich, tasting faintly of berries and autumn. I sipped it carefully, feeling warmth spread through my chest and limbs. Lord Aldrich settled into the chair across from me, his own cup held loosely in one hand. He didn't drink. He simply watched me with that same measuring gaze, as though I were a puzzle he was trying to solve. "Your husband," he said finally, "does he beat you?" The directness of the question startled me so badly I nearly dropped my cup. No one had ever asked me that. No one had ever acknowledged what happened behind closed doors. My voice broke. I cleared my throat and tried again. "He has never struck me, my lord." "That is not what I asked." I stared down into my wine, watching firelight dance across its dark surface. How did I explain that Gareth's cruelty came in words, not blows? That he knew exactly how to diminish me without leaving marks? That 3 years of his contempt had worn me down to something less than I'd been, something small and frightened and hollow? "He does not need to strike me," I said quietly. "There are other ways to hurt." Lord Aldrich was silent for a long moment. When I dared to glance up, I found his expression had changed. The sternness remained, but beneath it I glimpsed something darker, something cold and dangerous. "Your husband is Gareth of Millbrook," he said. Another statement, not a question. I nodded, surprised he knew, but of course he would. Gareth made certain everyone knew who he was, always puffing himself up with tales of his minor holdings and distant connections to nobility. He'd married me for my dowry, the small estate my mother had left me, and been bitterly disappointed to discover the lands were less profitable than he'd hoped. I'd been paying for that disappointment ever since. I know him, Lord Aldrich continued, his voice flat. I know the type of man he is. Small, petty, the sort who needs to make others smaller to feel large himself. The accuracy of his assessment struck me like a physical blow. I'd spent 3 years thinking I was the problem, that if I could just be better, quieter, more obedient, Gareth might soften toward me. But hearing this stranger name the truth so plainly made something crack open inside my chest. I shouldn't have run, I heard myself say. It will only make things worse when I return. When you return. Lord Aldrich leaned forward, his gray eyes sharpening. You speak as though you have already decided. What choice do I have? The words came out more bitter than I'd intended. He is my husband. The church, the law, everyone. They all say a wife belongs to her husband. If I don't return, he will find me. And if he finds me... I trailed off, not wanting to imagine what Gareth would do. Lord Aldrich set down his cup with careful deliberation. The law also says a husband must provide for his wife, protect her, treat her with respect. Your husband has failed in all these duties. The law is written by men, I said softly. For men. Yes. His mouth curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. It is. But I am a man who holds to older laws than those written in books. A man who harms those weaker than himself is no man at all. He is a coward. I felt something warm unfurl in my chest at his words, though I knew better than to hope. Lords might speak of honor and justice, but in the end they protected their own interests, and a runaway wife was not Lord Aldrich's concern. You are kind to say so, my lord, I said, setting my cup aside and making to stand. But I have imposed upon your hospitality long enough. I should sit down, Alowan. I froze, half risen from my chair. The command in his voice was absolute, but again there was no cruelty in it, only certainty. I have not dismissed you, he continued, and you have not finished your wine. Slowly I sank back into the chair. My injured foot throbbed, and I was suddenly aware of how exhausted I was. I hadn't slept properly in weeks, too afraid of what might happen while I was unconscious and vulnerable. Lord Aldrich rose and moved to a chest against the wall. He opened it and withdrew a heavy cloak of deep blue wool lined with fur. He crossed to me and settled it around my shoulders before I could protest. It smelled of cedar and something else, leather and steel and winter air. It smelled like safety, though I knew that was foolish. You're shivering, he said simply. I hadn't realized I was, but now that he mentioned it, I felt the tremors running through me, my body finally registering everything it had endured. The cold of the stone corridors, the terror of my flight, the knowledge that I couldn't keep running forever. I don't understand, I whispered. Why are you being kind to me? Lord Aldrich returned to his chair, and for the first time, something almost like surprise crossed his features. Does kindness require explanation? In my experience, yes. People are kind when they want something. He studied me for a long moment, and I had the uncomfortable sensation that he could see straight through me, past the careful walls I'd built, down to the frightened girl who still believed against all evidence that the world might hold something better than what she'd known. Perhaps, he said finally, I am kind because someone ought to be. Because you came into my chambers bleeding and terrified, and turning you away would make me no better than the man you ran from. I wanted to believe him. God help me. I wanted to believe that kindness without cost existed somewhere in this world. But 3 years with Gareth had taught me to question every gentle word, every soft gesture, waiting for the moment when it would all turn sharp and cruel. I cannot stay here, I said, pulling the cloak tighter around myself. When Gareth discovers I'm missing, he'll search for me. If he finds me in a lord's chambers—" I couldn't finish the thought. The scandal alone would give Gareth all the justification he needed for whatever punishment he devised. Lord Aldrich's expression remained unchanged. "Let him search. These chambers are mine, and no man enters without my permission, not even your husband." "You don't understand. I understand perfectly." His voice cut through my protest like a blade through silk. "Your husband is a bully who has spent 3 years making you believe you deserve his treatment. He has convinced you that you are powerless, that you have no choices, that you must accept whatever cruelty he offers. Am I wrong?" I opened my mouth to argue, but no words came. Because he wasn't wrong. Gareth had spent our entire marriage whittling away at my sense of self until I'd become exactly what he wanted, a wife too frightened to question, too broken to resist. "I thought not," Lord Aldrich said quietly. He stood and walked to the fire, adding another log. Sparks flew upward, and I watched them dance and die against the dark stones of the chimney. "You will stay here tonight. In the morning, we will discuss what comes next." "My lord, I cannot possibly—" "You can, you will." He turned to face me, and the firelight cast half his face in shadow. "There is a servant's room adjoining this chamber. It has a bed, a lock on the door. You will sleep there. In the morning, when you've rested and your foot is healed, we will speak again." I wanted to refuse. Accepting his help felt dangerous in ways I couldn't articulate. But the alternative was returning to Gareth tonight, and my body rebelled at the thought. Every part of me ached with exhaustion and fear. "Why?" I whispered. "Why would you help me?" Lord Aldrich was quiet for so long, I thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, "Because 15 years ago, I had a sister. She married a man much like your husband. I was away at war when it happened, when she—" He stopped, his jaw tightening. "I was not there to help her. Perhaps by helping you I can balance some small portion of that debt." The grief in his voice was old but not diminished, worn smooth by years but still sharp enough to cut. I understood then that his kindness came from a wound that had never properly healed. "I'm sorry," I said softly. "For your sister." He nodded once, sharp and controlled. Then he moved toward a door I hadn't noticed before, opening it to reveal a small chamber beyond. "Come, I'll show you where you'll sleep." The servant's room was simple but clean, with a narrow bed covered in wool blankets, a small table with a basin and pitcher, and a window overlooking the castle courtyard. Lord Aldrich lit a candle from the fire in the main chamber and set it on the table. "The door locks from the inside," he said, demonstrating the heavy iron bolt. "No one will disturb you here." I stood in the doorway, still wrapped in his cloak, uncertain what to do or say. This small room felt like a sanctuary, but I knew it could only be temporary. "Thank you," I managed. The words felt inadequate for what he was offering. Not just shelter, but the first genuine kindness I'd experienced in years. He inclined his head. "Rest, Alain. We'll speak in the morning." He turned to leave, but I found myself speaking before I could think better of it. "Your sister. What was her name?" He paused in the doorway, his back to me. "Morel. Her name was Morel." "I'll remember her," I said quietly. "I'll honor her memory by accepting your help." Something in his shoulders softened, though his voice remained steady. "She would have liked you, I think. She had your strength, even if she couldn't see it in herself." Then he was gone, pulling the door shut behind him. I stood alone in the small chamber, listening to his footsteps fade in the main room beyond. Slowly, carefully, I slid the bolt home. The metallic click echoed in the silence, final and secure. I shed Lord Aldrich's cloak and folded it carefully, then sat on the bed. The mattress was stuffed with fresh straw, not the lumpy, stale thing I'd grown accustomed to in Gareth's chambers. I unlaced my remaining shoe and examined my bandaged foot. Lord Aldrich had done skilled work. The binding was firm, but not too tight, and the bleeding had stopped. Through the small window, I could hear the sounds of the castle settling for the night. Voices in the distance, the clang of the kitchen door, the bark of a dog in the courtyard. Normal sounds, safe sounds. I lay down on the bed, pulling the blankets over myself, and waited for sleep to come. But my mind spun with questions and fears. What would tomorrow bring? What would Gareth do when he discovered my absence? And what had I truly escaped to? Another form of captivity, only gentler? But beneath the fear, something else stirred. Something I'd almost forgotten existed. The faintest whisper of possibility, fragile as a candle flame in wind. Perhaps, just perhaps, there was more to life than what I'd known. I woke to golden light streaming through the window and the smell of fresh bread. For a moment, I couldn't remember where I was. Then memory crashed back. My flight, Lord Aldrich, the small servants' room with its blessed lock. I sat up quickly, wincing as my injured foot protested. Someone had left a tray outside my door. I could smell it, hear the faint clink of pottery. But I hadn't heard anyone approach, which meant I'd slept deeply for the first time in months. Cautiously, I slid back the bolt and opened the door a crack. A wooden tray sat on the floor, laden with bread, cheese, cold meat, and a small pot of honey. There was also a pitcher of water, a clean cloth, and, I stared in surprise, a simple gown of dove-gray wool, far finer than anything I'd worn since my wedding day. I brought the tray inside and locked the door again, though I felt foolish for the precaution. If Lord Aldrich had meant me harm, he'd had ample opportunity last night. But old habits died hard, and Gareth had taught me to trust no one. The food was excellent, and I ate more than was probably seemly, too hungry to care about propriety. The bread was still warm, the honey sweet and golden, the cheese sharp and aged. Each bite felt like a small rebellion against the deprivation I had endured. When I finished, I examined the gown. It was well made, with careful stitching and a cut that would flatter without being ostentatious. I stripped off my rumpled blue kirtle, now stained with blood and dirt, and pulled the gray wool over my head. It fit well enough, though it was slightly loose in the shoulders. It had been made for someone taller, I thought, someone like Morel. The realization made my throat tight. Lord Aldrich had given me his dead sister's clothing. I used the water and cloth to wash as best I could, scrubbing away the grime of yesterday's flight. My hair was a tangled mess, but I worked through it patiently with my fingers, eventually braiding it in a simple plait that hung over one shoulder. A knock sounded on the door. "Allowin'?" Lord Aldrich's voice, quiet but clear. "May I enter?" I opened the door, suddenly self-conscious in the borrowed gown. Lord Aldrich stood in the doorway of the main chamber, dressed in dark wool and leather, a sword belted at his hip. He looked every inch the warrior lord, but his expression softened slightly when he saw me. "The gown suits you," he said simply. "It was your sister's." Again, not a question. "Yes, I've kept some of her things. I thought—" He paused, something almost like uncertainty crossing his features. "I thought she would want them to be useful rather than gathering dust in a chest." "Thank you," I said quietly. "For the gown, for the food, for everything." Lord Aldrich stepped into the main chamber, and I followed, closing the door behind me. Morning light filled the room now, making the tapestries glow and casting the carved furniture in warm relief. By daylight, I could see details I'd missed in last night's firelight. The books stacked on a side table, the maps rolled and stored in a corner, the well-maintained weapons hanging on the wall. "Have you thought about what you wish to do?" he asked, moving to stand by the window overlooking the courtyard. I joined him there, keeping a respectful distance. Below, servants hurried about their morning tasks. A blacksmith worked at his forge, hammer ringing against anvil. Stable boys led horses to water. The castle was waking, and with it, my temporary sanctuary was ending. I don't know, I admitted. I cannot return to Gareth, but I have nowhere else to go. My mother's estate is his now by law. I have no family, no coin of my own, no— That's not entirely true, Lord Aldrich interrupted. He turned from the window to face me, his gray eyes serious. Your mother's estate was your inheritance. The law may say it belongs to your husband, but there are precedents for separating a wife's property from her husband's control under certain circumstances. Hope fluttered in my chest, fragile and frightening. What circumstances? Abuse, neglect, mismanagement. If it could be proven that your husband has failed in his duties as protector and steward, a case could be made to the king's court for the return of your lands. But proving such things— I trailed off, thinking of how carefully Gareth had maintained his public image. To everyone outside our chambers, he was a respectable minor lord, perhaps a bit pompous, but harmless. No one knew what he was behind closed doors. Would be difficult, yes, Lord Aldrich acknowledged, but not impossible, particularly if you had powerful allies willing to speak on your behalf. I stared at him, not quite believing what he was suggesting. You would do that? Stand against my husband in court? I would do more than that. He crossed to the table and picked up a sealed letter I hadn't noticed before. Last night, after you retired, I wrote to the king. We served together in the northern campaigns, and he values my counsel. I've explained your situation and requested an audience on your behalf. My legs suddenly felt weak. My lord, I cannot ask you to— You did not ask. I offered. His voice was firm but not unkind. Alawen, you have two choices before you. You can return to your husband and continue to endure his cruelty until it breaks you completely. Or you can fight. It will not be easy. There will be scandal, resistance, perhaps even danger. But at the end of that fight, you might find freedom. Freedom. The word hung in the air between us, impossibly beautiful and terrifying. I'd stopped believing in freedom 3 years ago, had learned to make myself content with mere survival. But standing in Lord Aldrich's chambers, wearing his sister's gown, with morning light painting everything gold, I felt something long dormant stir within me. If I fight, I said slowly, testing the words, Gareth will retaliate. He'll say terrible things about me. He'll claim I'm faithless, mad, hysterical, all the things men say about women who refuse to be broken. Let him say what he will. Words are weapons only if we allow them to be. You say that because you're a man, a lord. Words cannot touch you the way they touch me. Lord Aldrich was quiet for a moment, and I worried I'd overstepped. But when he spoke, his voice held no anger. You're right. I have power and privilege you do not, which is precisely why I should use those advantages to help you. Power that serves only itself is tyranny. Power that lifts others is justice. I moved to the window again, looking down at the courtyard but not really seeing it. My mind spun with possibilities and dangers, hope and fear tangled so tightly I couldn't separate them. If I do this, if I fight, I need to understand why you're helping me, I said, still not looking at him. Is it truly just because of your sister? Or is there something you want from me in return? An honest question deserves an honest answer. I heard him move closer, though he didn't touch me. Yes, it began because of Morel. I see in you what I saw in her, strength she didn't recognize in herself, dignity maintained despite circumstances designed to destroy it. But it has become more than that. I've spent 15 years fighting other men's battles. Perhaps it's time I fought one that matters. I turned to face him, searching his gray eyes for deception or hidden motive. I found only a quiet sincerity that made my chest ache. What if we fail? I whispered. What if the king refuses to hear me or rules in Gareth's favor? Then we will have tried, and you will know you fought for yourself rather than accepting defeat without struggle. That knowledge alone has value." He was right, and I knew it. Even if I failed, even if I lost everything, at least I would have tried. At least I would have stood up and said, "No, my life matters, my pain matters, I deserve better than this." "All right," I heard myself say, "I'll fight." Something shifted in Lord Aldrich's expression, not quite a smile, but a softening around his eyes that made him look younger, less burdened. "Good. Then we have much to prepare." Lord Aldrich crossed to his desk and began gathering documents, moving with efficient purpose. "We'll need to document everything, every instance of cruelty, every failure of duty, every witness who might testify on your behalf. It won't be pleasant recounting these memories, but the King's court requires evidence." I nodded, though my stomach tightened at the thought of laying bare every humiliation, every wound Gareth had inflicted. "Where do we begin?" "With the beginning." "Tell me about your marriage. How did it come about?" I settled into the chair by the fire, gathering my thoughts. My mother arranged it before she died. She knew she was failing, and she wanted me protected. Gareth seemed respectable enough, a minor lord with lands of his own, connections to noble families. She thought I would be safe with him. "But he wanted your inheritance." "Yes." My mother's estate was small but profitable. Good farmland, a mill, tenant farmers who paid their rents reliably. Gareth saw it as a way to improve his standing. I twisted my hands in the gray wool of Morel's gown. He was kind during the courtship, attentive. I thought... I stopped, embarrassed by my own naivety. "You thought he cared for you," Lord Aldrich said quietly. "That's not foolishness, Alawan. That's hope. He deceived you deliberately. The change came on our wedding night. Not violent, not then, just cold, disappointed. He said I wasn't what he'd expected, that I'd misrepresented myself. I didn't understand what he meant. I'd never claimed to be anything other than what I was." Lord Aldrich had taken up a quill and parchment, making notes as I spoke. The scratch of his writing was oddly comforting, proof that someone was finally listening, finally recording what had been invisible for so long. "It grew worse over time," I continued. "He would criticize everything, my appearance, my speech, how I managed the household. Nothing I did was right. When his crops failed that first harvest, he blamed me, said I'd brought bad fortune. When his horse threw a shoe and went lame, that was my fault too. I became responsible for every disappointment, every setback. Did he isolate you from others?" I nodded. "He dismissed the servants I'd brought from my mother's house, said they made me too proud. He discouraged me from attending chapel, from visiting the village. He said people were talking about me, judging me, that I embarrassed him. Eventually, I stopped leaving our chambers unless he required it." Lord Aldrich's jaw tightened, but his voice remained level. "And the servants in his household? Did any of them witness his treatment of you?" "Some, but they won't speak against him. He's their lord, and I'm—" I trailed off, not wanting to say what I was. "Nothing. No one. A woman with no power and no protection." "You are the rightful owner of an estate that he controls through marriage," Lord Aldrich corrected. "That gives you standing the servants lack." A knock at the chamber door made me start, my heart leaping into my throat. Lord Aldrich rose smoothly, his hand moving to the sword at his belt. "Who is it?" "Torvin, my lord. I bring word from the hall." Lord Aldrich opened the door to admit a tall man with gray-streaked hair and the bearing of a seasoned soldier. His eyes flicked to me briefly, taking in my presence without visible surprise or judgment. "Speak," Lord Aldrich said. "Gareth of Millbrook has raised an alarm. He claims his wife has gone missing, possibly abducted. He's demanding the castle guard assist in searching for her." Torvin's expression remained neutral, but something in his tone suggested he knew exactly where Gareth's missing wife was. My blood turned to ice. He's here, in the castle. He's been here since yesterday attending the King's Council, Lord Aldrich said calmly. As have I. We're both advisors to the crown, though I outrank him considerably. He turned back to Torvin. What does he claim to know of her disappearance? He says she was distraught, possibly fevered, that she's not in her right mind. He claims she may harm herself if not found quickly. Torvin's lip curled slightly. He's quite the concerned husband by his telling. I felt sick. Of course, Gareth would paint himself as the worried spouse, and me as the mad, unstable wife. It was brilliant, really. If I spoke against him now, my words would be dismissed as the ravings of a disturbed woman. "And the castle guard?" Lord Aldrich asked. Captain Hadris told him they would make inquiries, but that wives often seek solitude when troubled. He suggested Gareth check the chapel, the gardens. He's buying time, but he can't refuse to search indefinitely. Lord Aldrich nodded. Thank you, Torvin. Tell Hadris I request an audience within the hour, and tell no one that Lady Elowyn is here. Torvin's eyes widened slightly at the title Lord Aldrich used, lady, not merely goodwife or mistress. Yes, my lord. Shall I post guards outside your chambers? Discreetly. I want no interruptions today. After Torvin left, Lord Aldrich turned to me. I must have looked as terrified as I felt, because his expression gentled. He cannot reach you here, Elowyn. I swear it. You don't understand. He'll twist this, make it seem like I'm the one at fault, that I've done something wrong. Everyone will believe him. Not everyone. He returned to the desk, his movements purposeful. We accelerate our plans. I'll send the letter to the king by messenger within the hour, and I'll speak to Captain Hadris personally. Ensure he understands the true nature of your situation. Hadris will believe you? Hadris served with me in the north. He knows me well enough to trust my word, and he's seen Gareth's type before. Lord Aldrich sealed the letter with his signet ring, pressing the wax firmly. But we need more than my word and Hadris's trust. We need evidence that cannot be dismissed. What kind of evidence? I asked, though part of me didn't want to know. Lord Aldrich set down the sealed letter and regarded me thoughtfully. We need witnesses who saw Gareth's treatment of you. Servants who might testify, merchants who delivered to your household, anyone who observed his conduct. They'll be too frightened to speak. Perhaps, but fear can be overcome if the alternative is worse. He moved to stand before me, his gray eyes intent. Elowyn, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. Has Gareth ever physically harmed you? I started to shake my head, then stopped. Not in the way you mean. He has never struck me with his fist or drawn blood, but he has grabbed me hard enough to leave bruises. He has pushed me against walls, held me down, prevented me from leaving rooms. I swallowed hard. He has forced himself upon me when I did not wish it, said it was his right as my husband. Lord Aldrich's expression darkened, something dangerous flickering in his eyes. When he spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. That is harm, Elowyn, all of it. The law may call it a husband's right, but that does not make it just. The king will see it differently. Perhaps, but there are other charges that cannot be dismissed so easily. Mismanagement of your estate, for one. Tell me, has he sent you reports of the harvests, the rents collected, the state of your lands? I blinked, surprised by the question. No. He said such matters were not for wives to concern themselves with. But they are your lands, your inheritance. By law, you're entitled to know their condition. Lord Aldrich began pacing, his mind clearly working through strategy. If we can prove he's been neglectful or deliberately destructive in managing your property, that gives us grounds for separation and return of your inheritance to your control. Hope sparked again, stronger this time. How do we prove such things? We send someone to your estate, someone discreet, who can speak with your tenants and assess the true state of affairs. If Gareth has been extracting excessive rents or allowing the lands to fall into disrepair, your people will know. But won't that alert him to what we're doing? Not if we're careful. The messenger will go as a royal inspector, assessing all estates in the region for tax purposes. Gareth won't know he's been specifically targeted until it's too late. The plan was bold, clever even, but doubts gnawed at me. And if the estate is in good condition? If he's managed it well, then we pursue other avenues. But I suspect a man who treats his wife as disposable property treats her lands much the same way. Men like Gareth care only for immediate gain, not long-term stewardship. A commotion in the hallway outside made us both freeze. Raised voices, one of them unmistakably Gareth's. "Where is she? I know she must be here somewhere. I demand you allow me to search these chambers." Gareth's voice carried clearly through the heavy oak door, shrill with barely controlled fury. I shrank back instinctively, my body remembering 3 years of conditioning, even as my mind tried to resist. Lord Aldrich moved to stand between me and the door, one hand resting on his sword hilt. "Stay calm," he said quietly. "He cannot enter without my permission." "My lord, I must insist." Gareth's voice again, closer now. "My wife is missing, possibly injured or worse. As a fellow peer of the realm, surely you understand my concern." "I understand that you're making a scene in the king's own castle, Millbrook." That was Torvin's voice, hard and unyielding. "Lord Aldrich has made it clear he's not to be disturbed. You'll have to direct your concerns to Captain Hadris." "This is outrageous. I have rights. Your wife is your concern, not Lord Aldrich's. Now step back, or I'll have you removed from this corridor by force." There was a moment of tense silence. Then Gareth's voice came again, lower, but no less angry. "You'll regret this interference, Torvin. All of you will. When I find Elewin, and I will find her, she'll answer for this humiliation." Footsteps retreated down the corridor, and I released a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. My hands were shaking, and I pressed them flat against my thighs to still them. Lord Aldrich turned from the door, his expression grim. "That confirms what we suspected. He's more concerned with his wounded pride than your welfare. He'll be furious when he learns I'm here. He'll claim you seduced me, that I came willingly, that we—" I couldn't finish the accusation, but we both knew what Gareth would imply. "Let him claim what he wishes. Your presence in my chambers has been witnessed only by Torvin, who is absolutely loyal, and by the servant who brought your breakfast. A woman who has served my house for 20 years, and who will testify to whatever I ask." He paused, considering. "Though, perhaps it would be wise to add another witness, someone beyond reproach." "Who?" "Father Benedict, the king's own chaplain. A holy man whose word cannot be questioned. I'll have him come here, speak with you, satisfy himself that you're here of your own free will and under my protection for honorable reasons." The idea of explaining my situation to yet another person made me want to curl into myself, but I recognized the wisdom in it. "When?" "This afternoon. I'll arrange it after I speak with Captain Hadris." He moved back to his desk, gathering the sealed letter and several documents. "While I'm gone, stay in this chamber. Lock both doors, the one to the corridor and the one to your room. Open them for no one except Torvin or myself. Understood?" "Yes, my lord." He paused at the door, looking back at me. "We will get through this, Elowin. I promise you." Then he was gone, and I was alone with my fear and the fragile, terrifying seed of hope he'd planted. The hours Lord Aldrich was gone felt endless. I paced the chamber like a caged animal, starting at every sound in the corridor beyond. Twice, I heard voices pass by, servants gossiping about Gareth's frantic search, speculation about what had happened to his poor wife. Their pity stung worse than their scorn would have. I tried to occupy myself by examining Lord Aldrich's books, treatises on law and governance, histories of the realm, even a volume of poetry that surprised me. The poetry was well worn, its pages soft from frequent reading, and I wondered what dreams a warrior lord harbored in his private moments. Eventually, I settled by the window, watching the courtyard below. I spotted Gareth twice, striding across the stones with his usual self-important swagger, stopping servants to question them. From this height, he looked smaller than I remembered, less imposing. Perhaps that was all he'd ever been, a small man who needed to make others smaller still to feel significant. The sun had passed its zenith when Lord Aldrich finally returned, accompanied by an elderly man in the simple brown robes of a Benedictine monk. Father Benedict had a kind face, deeply lined with age, and eyes that seemed to see more than most. "Lady Alawen," Lord Aldrich said, and I noticed he used the title again, claiming status for me that Gareth had spent 3 years denying. "This is Father Benedict. I've explained your situation to him in general terms, but he wishes to speak with you directly." The priest bowed slightly. "My child, Lord Aldrich has told me you seek refuge from a difficult marriage. I'm here not to judge, but to understand, so that I might counsel both you and the king when he hears your case." Something in his gentle tone made my eyes burn with tears I refused to shed. "Thank you, Father. May I sit?" He gestured to the chair opposite mine, and I nodded. Lord Aldrich retreated to his desk, giving us the illusion of privacy while remaining close enough to intervene if needed. Father Benedict settled himself with the careful movements of age, then fixed me with those perceptive eyes. "Tell me, child, in your own words, without fear, what has brought you to seek separation from your husband?" And so I told him. Everything. The criticisms that had worn away at my sense of self, the isolation that had left me completely dependent on Gareth's goodwill, the way he'd used my body as if it were property rather than person. I told him about the small cruelties that accumulated like drops of water, wearing away stone until I'd become someone I barely recognized. Smaller, quieter, less than I'd been. Father Benedict listened without interruption, his expression grave but compassionate. When I finished, my throat was raw and my hands were trembling, but I felt oddly lighter, as if speaking the truth had released some of the weight I'd been carrying. The priest was quiet for a long moment, his weathered hands folded in his lap. Finally, he spoke. "Child, what you describe is not a marriage in the eyes of God. A marriage should be a partnership of mutual respect and care. What you've endured is bondage. But the church teaches that wives must submit to their husbands," I said, voicing the argument I knew Gareth would make. "Submit, yes. But submission is not the same as destruction. A husband who tears down his wife rather than building her up has failed in his sacred duty." Father Benedict leaned forward slightly. "Tell me, has your husband ever shown remorse for his treatment of you? Has he ever sought to change?" I thought back over 3 years of marriage, searching for a single moment of genuine regret. "No, Father. He believes he has every right to treat me as he does. He says I deserve it, that I'm fortunate he tolerates me at all." The priest's expression darkened. "Then he is not merely failing in his duties, he is actively rejecting them. The Church's teaching on marriage requires both parties to honor their vows. Your husband has not honored his. Will you tell this to the king?" Lord Aldrich asked from his position by the desk. "I will. And I will recommend that Lady Alawen be granted separation and return of her inheritance." Father Benedict turned back to me. "However, you must understand that this will be difficult. The law favors husbands, and many will see your actions as rebellion rather than self-preservation." "I understand, Father." "Do you?" His eyes searched mine. "You will be called names. Your reputation will be questioned. Some will refuse to associate with you, fearing the scandal. You may find yourself more alone after this fight than you were during your marriage. The thought terrified me, but I lifted my chin. I would rather be alone and free than companioned and caged. A smile touched Father Benedict's lips. You have more strength than you know, child. Hold fast to it in the days ahead. He rose, bones creaking with the effort. Lord Aldrich, I will speak to the king this evening. He should hear of this matter before Gareth can poison the well with his version of events. Thank you, Father, Lord Aldrich said, seeing him to the door. After the priest left, Lord Aldrich turned to me. That went well, better than I'd hoped. He believes me, I said, still somewhat surprised by this fact. He actually believes me. Because you spoke truth, and Father Benedict has spent 50 years learning to recognize it. Lord Aldrich moved to pour wine for us both. Now we wait for the king's response. It shouldn't take long. His Majesty values Father Benedict's counsel above most others. I accepted the wine with trembling hands. And if the king refuses to hear me, then takesty we pursue other options. But I don't believe it will come to that. Lord Aldrich proved correct. Before the evening meal, a royal page arrived with a summons. The king would grant me an audience the following morning, with Father Benedict and Lord Aldrich permitted to stand as my advocates. The news should have brought relief, but instead, I felt only mounting dread. I don't know how to address a king, I confessed after the page had gone. What if I say something wrong? What if he thinks me foolish or weak? The king is just, Alowan. He'll judge you on the truth of your words, not their eloquence. Lord Aldrich set down his own cup and regarded me seriously. But I think we should prepare you nonetheless. Let me play Gareth's advocate, the man who will argue against you. I'll raise every objection he might present, and you'll practice responding. The thought of Lord Aldrich playing Gareth made my stomach turn, but I recognized the necessity. All right. He straightened, and something shifted in his demeanor. When he spoke again, his voice had taken on a sneering quality that made me flinch. Lady Elowen, you claim your husband has mistreated you, yet you bear no visible marks. How can we believe these accusations when your own body shows no evidence? I swallowed hard, reminding myself this was practice, that Lord Aldrich wasn't really attacking me. Not all wounds are visible, Your Majesty. My husband has been careful to avoid leaving marks that others might see. His cruelty comes in words and isolation, in using my own fears against me. Words, Lord Aldrich continued in that awful voice. Surely a woman of breeding should have thicker skin. Are we to grant separations every time a wife's feelings are hurt? There is a difference between hurt feelings and systematic destruction, Your Majesty. My husband has spent 3 years convincing me I am worthless, that I deserve his treatment, that I should be grateful for his tolerance. That is not discipline or correction. It is abuse designed to break my spirit. Lord Aldrich nodded, dropping the character. Good. Direct, honest, specific. Remember to address the king properly and look him in the eye when you speak. Show him you're not broken, that you have dignity worth defending. We continued this way for hours, Lord Aldrich raising every possible objection while I practiced responding with clarity and strength. It was exhausting, forcing me to relive painful memories again and again, but gradually I felt something shift inside me. Each time I stated the truth plainly, without apology or shame, I reclaimed a small piece of myself that Gareth had taken. As darkness fell and Lord Aldrich lit candles against the gloom, he finally called a halt to our preparations. You're ready, he said simply. More ready than you know. I don't feel ready. No one ever does. But courage isn't the absence of fear, Elowen. It's choosing to act despite it. That night, I lay in the small servants' room with my mind racing, sleep impossible despite my exhaustion. tomorrow would determine everything: my future, my freedom, perhaps my very survival. If the king ruled against me, Gareth would make certain I never defied him again. Through the thin wall, I could hear Lord Aldrich moving about in the main chamber. At some point, I heard the scratch of quill on parchment. He was writing something, though I couldn't imagine what correspondence required attention at this late hour. I must have dozed eventually, because I woke to soft morning light and the now familiar smell of fresh bread. Another tray had been left outside my door, along with a gown of deep blue wool, finer even than the gray one I'd worn yesterday. There was also a note in Lord Aldrich's angular script: "Wear this for the king. Blue suits you better than gray. A." I dressed carefully, my hands steadier than they'd been the previous morning. The blue gown fit perfectly, as if it had been made for me, and I wondered if Lord Aldrich had commissioned it overnight. The thought of him thinking of such details, of wanting me to feel confident when I faced the king, made something warm unfold in my chest. When I emerged from the servants' room, Lord Aldrich was waiting, dressed in formal attire: a tunic of deep green with silver embroidery, a sword with an ornate hilt belted at his waist. He looked every inch the powerful lord, commanding and sure. His eyes widened slightly when he saw me. "The blue suits you," he said, echoing his note. "Thank you for the gown, and for everything else. Thank me when this is over and you're free." He offered his arm. "Are you ready?" I took his arm, feeling the solid strength of him beneath the fine fabric. "As ready as I'll ever be." We left the chambers together, Torvin falling into step behind us as we made our way through the castle corridors. Servants stopped their work to stare as we passed, and I heard whispers following in our wake. By now, everyone knew that Gareth's missing wife had been found in Lord Aldrich's chambers. The scandal had already begun. Let them whisper, I thought, lifting my chin. Let them judge. I would face the king with dignity, speak my truth with clarity, and whatever came after, at least I would have tried. The throne room was vast and intimidating, with soaring ceilings and walls hung with banners representing the great houses of the realm. The king sat on a raised dais at the far end, a man in his middle years with graying hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. Father Benedict stood to his right, and several other advisors clustered nearby. And there, to the left of the dais, stood Gareth. Gareth's face twisted with rage when he saw me on Lord Aldrich's arm, his dismayed eyes darting between us with an expression that promised retribution. He'd dressed in his finest clothing, clearly intending to present himself as the wronged husband, the concerned lord. But his hands clenched into fists at his sides, and I could see the effort it cost him to maintain his composure. "Lady Elowen of Thornwood," the king's herald announced, using my maiden name rather than Gareth's. Another small victory, orchestrated by Lord Aldrich, no doubt. We approached the dais, and I sank into as graceful a curtsy as my trembling legs would allow. Lord Aldrich bowed beside me, and when we rose, the king gestured for us to approach. "Lord Aldrich," the king said, his voice carrying easily through the hall, "Father Benedict has informed me of a most unusual situation. You harbor this woman in your chambers, claiming she seeks refuge from her lawful husband. Is this true?" "It is, Your Majesty," Lord Aldrich replied, his voice steady and clear. "Lady Elowen came to my chambers 2 nights ago, injured and fleeing mistreatment. As a lord of this realm and a man of honor, I could not turn her away." "Mistreatment!" Gareth burst out, taking a step forward. "Your Majesty, I must protest. My wife is unwell, prone to fits of melancholy and strange fancies. She has convinced herself of injuries that do not exist, painted me as a monster when I have been nothing but patient with her difficulties." The king held up a hand, silencing Gareth. "You will have your turn to speak, Millbrook. First, I would hear from the lady herself." He turned those sharp eyes to me. Lady Alowan, you claim your husband has mistreated you. Speak plainly. What are these accusations? This was it, the moment everything hung upon. I drew a deep breath and met the king's gaze directly, as Lord Aldrich had taught me. Your Majesty, my husband has spent 3 years systematically destroying my sense of worth and dignity. He has isolated me from all friends and family, criticized every aspect of my being, and made me believe I deserved his contempt. He has controlled my movements, denied me basic comforts, and used my body without regard for my wishes. He has managed my inherited estate without providing me any accounting, treating my lands as his own property rather than recognizing my rights as their inheritor. These are serious charges, the king said, his expression unreadable. Yet I see no bruises, no obvious signs of harm. How do you answer that? Not all violence leaves visible marks, Your Majesty. My husband has been careful to wound in ways that cannot be seen by others, but I can provide witnesses, servants who have heard his words to me, merchants who have observed his treatment, records that will show his mismanagement of my estate. Gareth laughed, the sound harsh and mocking. Witnesses? What servant would dare speak against their lord? And as for records, I have managed our holdings, not just hers, but ours, as is my right as her husband, with perfect competence. So, nurse? Then you would have no objection to an inspection of those holdings, Lord Aldrich interjected smoothly. A royal assessor could examine the estate's condition, speak with the tenants, review the accounting. If your management has been as competent as you claim, such an inspection would only vindicate you. Gareth's face flushed dark red. I object to the implication that I have anything to hide. This is nothing more than my wife's hysteria, encouraged by those who seek to undermine my authority. Encouraged by me, you mean? Lord Aldrich said, his voice dropping to something dangerous. Say it plainly, Millbrook. You accuse me of seducing your wife, of harboring her for improper purposes. That is what you're implying, is it not? I imply nothing, Gareth shot back. But what man of honor keeps another man's wife in his private chambers for 2 days? What innocent explanation can there be for such behavior? The king's expression sharpened with interest. An excellent question. Lord Aldrich, how do you answer? Father Benedict can attest to the propriety of Lady Elowen's stay, Lord Aldrich replied calmly. She has slept in a separate room, with a lock on the door. She has been attended by my most trusted female servants, and I have acted only as her protector and advocate, not as anything more intimate. Father Benedict stepped forward. I can confirm Lord Aldrich's account, Your Majesty. I spoke with Lady Elowen at length yesterday. She is in his chambers by her own choice, seeking protection from a husband who has failed in his sacred duties. There is no impropriety in Lord Aldrich offering sanctuary to a woman in need. A woman who is still legally my wife! Gareth's voice had risen to a near shout. Your Majesty, I demand she be returned to me immediately. This entire proceeding is an outrage, a mockery of the natural order. A wife belongs to her husband, and no king or priest or meddling lord has the right to come between them. The throne room fell silent. Even Gareth seemed to realize he'd overstepped, that shouting demands at the king was not the wisest course. But the damage was done. His mask of the concerned husband had slipped, revealing the controlling, furious man beneath. The king leaned back in his throne, studying Gareth with cold assessment. You claim your wife belongs to you, like property, like livestock. That is not what It is precisely what you said. The king's voice cut through Gareth's protest. You speak of ownership, not partnership, of possession, not mutual respect. Father Benedict, does the Church teach that a wife is her husband's property? No, Your Majesty, the priest replied firmly. The Church teaches that marriage is a sacrament of 2 souls, joined in mutual love and duty. A husband who treats his wife as property has profaned that sacrament. The king nodded slowly, then turned his attention back to me. Lady Alowan, if I were to grant you separation from your husband and return of your inherited lands, what would you do? Where would you go? The question caught me off guard. I'd been so focused on escaping Gareth that I hadn't thought much beyond that immediate goal. But the king waited, and I needed to show him I wasn't simply running from one man's protection to another's. I would return to my mother's estate, Your Majesty, I said, my voice growing stronger as the vision formed in my mind. I would learn to manage the lands properly, as my mother did before her marriage. I would ensure the tenants are treated fairly and the holdings prosper. I would rebuild what has been neglected and prove myself worthy of my inheritance. A noble ambition, the king said, but estate management requires knowledge and experience you may not possess. How would you accomplish this? I would hire a competent steward, Your Majesty. I would seek counsel from those with more experience. And I would learn? I thought of my mother, who had managed her lands with wisdom and care despite being widowed young. My mother taught me the foundations before she died. What I lack in experience, I will gain through dedication and hard work. The king glanced at Lord Aldrich. And you, Thornhaven? What is your interest in this matter? Why champion a woman you barely know? Lord Aldrich's expression remained steady. Because justice demands it, Your Majesty. Because I have seen too many men abuse the power the law gives them over their wives, and because I failed to protect my own sister from a similar fate. If I can prevent another woman from suffering as she did, then perhaps her death will have served some purpose. Something shifted in the king's expression, a flash of understanding, perhaps even sympathy. I remember Lady Morell, a gracious woman, taken too soon. He was quiet for a moment, then straightened in his throne. I will consider this matter carefully. In the meantime, Lady Elowen will remain under Lord Aldrich's protection, with Father Benedict as additional guardian to ensure propriety. Millbrook, you are forbidden from approaching or contacting your wife until I have made my decision. If you violate this order, you will face charges of contempt. Gareth's face turned purple with rage. Your Majesty, you cannot— I can, and I have. The king's voice was iron. You will also submit to a royal inspection of Lady Elowen's inherited estate. An assessor will be dispatched within the week to examine the lands, review the accounts, and speak with the tenants. If your management has been as exemplary as you claim, you have nothing to fear. This is an outrage, an absolute— One more word, Millbrook, and I will have you removed from this court. The king leaned forward slightly. You have revealed much of your character today, and none of it speaks in your favor. I suggest you retire to your chambers and consider how you wish to conduct yourself going forward. Gareth stared at the king for a long, tense moment. Then, with visible effort, he bowed stiffly and turned to leave. But as he passed Lord Aldrich and me, he leaned close enough to whisper, his voice venomous, "This isn't over." Lord Aldrich's hand moved to his sword hilt, but Gareth was already striding away, his footsteps echoing through the throne room. I found myself trembling, not with fear exactly, but with the overwhelming weight of what had just happened. The king had heard me. He had believed me. Or at least, he hadn't immediately dismissed my claims as the ravings of a hysterical woman. "Your Majesty," Lord Aldrich said, drawing the king's attention, "with your permission, I would like to personally oversee the inspection of Lady Elowen's estate. I can ensure it's conducted fairly and thoroughly." The king considered this. "You have much invested in this matter, Thornhaven. Some might question your objectivity. Then send your own royal assessor, Your Majesty. But allow me to accompany him. I have experience in estate management, and I can help identify signs of neglect or mismanagement that others might miss." "Very well. You may accompany the assessor, but he will make the final report. The king's gaze shifted to me. Lady Elowen, I admire your courage in bringing this matter before me. Few women would dare challenge their husbands so directly. But courage alone will not sustain you in the difficult days ahead. You will need strength, wisdom, and patience. I understand, Your Majesty. Thank you for hearing me. The king nodded in dismissal, and Lord Aldrich guided me from the throne room with a hand at my elbow. Torvin fell into step behind us once more, and I was grateful for his silent, protective presence. The corridors seemed to close in around me as we walked, the enormity of what I'd done finally settling over me like a heavy cloak. I had stood before the king and accused my husband of cruelty. There was no going back now. You did well, Lord Aldrich said quietly as we climbed the stairs toward his chambers. Better than well. You spoke with clarity and dignity. The king was impressed. Gareth will never forgive this, I whispered. Even if the king rules in my favor, Gareth will find ways to punish me. Let him try. He'll have to go through me first. The fierce protectiveness in Lord Aldrich's voice sent warmth through my chest, but also a prickle of concern. I don't want you hurt because of me. You've already risked so much, your reputation, your standing with the other lords. My reputation can withstand scandal, and any lord worth his title will understand why I acted as I did. We reached his chambers, and he ushered me inside, Torvin taking a position in the corridor. Once the door was closed, Lord Aldrich's shoulders relaxed slightly. Besides, some risks are worth taking. I moved to the window, looking out over the courtyard, where life continued its normal rhythms, oblivious to the upheaval in my own. What happens now? Now we wait for the assessor's report. It should take no more than a fortnight, a few days to travel to your estate, several days to conduct the inspection, then the journey back. Lord Aldrich joined me at the window. In the meantime, you remain here, under my protection. The thought of spending another fortnight in Lord Aldrich's chambers filled me with conflicting emotions. Relief, certainly. I was safe here, protected from Gareth's immediate wrath. But also a growing awareness of Lord Aldrich himself, of the way his presence filled a room, of the careful kindness beneath his stern exterior. I should at least make myself useful, I said, turning from the window. I cannot simply sit idle for 2 weeks while you arrange my entire life. A hint of amusement touched Lord Aldrich's features. What did you have in mind? Let me help with your correspondence. I have a good hand for writing, and my mother taught me how to manage household accounts. Or let me mend your clothing. I noticed you have several tunics in need of repair. Something, anything to feel less like a burden. You're not a burden, Elowen. But I feel like one. I twisted my hands in the blue wool of my gown. You've given me shelter, protection, advocacy. What have I given you in return except trouble and scandal? Lord Aldrich was quiet for a moment, studying me with those gray eyes that always seemed to see more than I wanted to reveal. You've given me purpose, he said finally. For 15 years, I've been fighting other men's battles, advising the king on matters of state, going through the motions of duty without passion. You've reminded me why those duties matter, why we build laws and seek justice. That is no small gift. His words made my throat tight. I think you would have remembered that without me. Perhaps, but you made it impossible to ignore. He moved toward his desk, gathering several documents. If you truly wish to help, you can assist with these land surveys. I need someone to review them and note any discrepancies in the reported yields versus the rents collected. It's tedious work, but it requires a sharp eye. I crossed to the desk eagerly, grateful for something concrete to occupy my mind. Show me what to look for. For the next several hours, we worked side by side, Lord Aldrich explaining the intricacies of estate management while I pored over columns of numbers and notations. It was intricate work, requiring attention to detail, and an understanding of how yields varied with weather, soil quality, and farming practices. But I found I enjoyed it. Enjoyed the way the patterns emerged once I understood what I was seeing. "You have a talent for this," Lord Aldrich observed as I flagged a suspicious discrepancy in a wheat harvest report. "Your mother taught you well. She used to let me help her with the accounts when I was young. She said a woman of property needed to understand numbers as well as any man." The memory brought both warmth and sadness. Gareth dismissed all of that as pretension, said I was foolish to think I understood such complex matters. "Gareth is a fool who mistakes ignorance for masculinity." Lord Aldrich's voice held contempt. "Men like him fear educated women because they recognize, on some level, their own inadequacy." His words echoed in my mind as we continued working. Gareth had spent 3 years convincing me I was foolish, incapable, less than. But sitting here with Lord Aldrich, proving I could understand complex accounts and spot inconsistencies, I began to question everything Gareth had made me believe about myself. What if I wasn't inadequate? What if Gareth's criticisms said more about him than about me? The thought was revolutionary and terrifying in equal measure. As afternoon faded into evening, a servant arrived with our meal: roasted fowl, fresh bread, vegetables in herb sauce. We ate at the table by the window, the work put aside for now. The conversation drifted from estate management to books, from books to travel, from travel to the small observations that revealed character. I found myself relaxing in Lord Aldrich's company in a way I'd never been able to relax with Gareth. There was no need to monitor every word for potential offense, no fear that a wrong phrase would trigger an outburst. Lord Aldrich seemed genuinely interested in my thoughts, asked questions that suggested he valued my perspective. It was intoxicating and dangerous, this feeling of being seen as a person rather than a possession. "Tell me about your sister," I said as we finished the meal. "Morel, what was she like?" Lord Aldrich's expression grew distant, but not closed off. "She was kind, too kind perhaps. She saw the best in everyone, even those who didn't deserve her faith." He turned his wine cup slowly between his hands. "She was betrothed to a man our father chose, a lord with good lands and better connections. I was away fighting in the north when the marriage took place. By the time I returned, it was too late." "What happened to her?" "Officially? A fall down the stairs. An accident," they said. His jaw tightened, but I saw the fear in the servant's eyes when I asked questions. "I heard the rumors they tried to hide." "She didn't fall. She jumped, unable to bear another day in that house." My hand moved to cover his before I could think better of it. "I'm so sorry." He looked down at our joined hands, and for a moment I thought he might pull away. But instead, he turned his palm up, his fingers curling gently around mine. "I swore after her death that I would never stand idle again when I saw a woman trapped as she was. That's why I helped you, Elowin. Not just because of duty or honor, but because I refuse to let another Morel die when I have the power to prevent it." His hand was warm, calloused from sword work, but gentle in its grip. I felt the connection between us like a physical thing, fragile, but real. It would be so easy to lean into that connection, to let myself believe it meant more than protector and protected. But I had just escaped one man's control. I couldn't afford to lose myself in another's shadow, no matter how different Lord Aldrich seemed from Gareth. I withdrew my hand gently, and if Lord Aldrich noticed the withdrawal, he gave no sign. We spoke of other things after that, neutral topics that carried no emotional weight. But something had shifted between us, an acknowledgement of feelings neither of us was quite ready to name. That night, I lay in the small servants' room and thought about the future that might lie ahead. If the king ruled in my favor, I would have my lands back, my independence. But independence meant being alone, and for the first time in 3 years, I'd experienced what it felt like to have someone truly see me, value me, stand beside me as an equal. The thought of leaving Lord Aldrich's chambers, of returning to my estate and managing it alone, brought an unexpected ache to my chest. But I pushed the feeling aside. I had fought too hard for freedom to surrender it now, even to someone as honorable as Lord Aldrich. I would be free. I would be independent. And if that meant being alone, then so be it. I had survived 3 years with Gareth. I could survive anything. The days that followed fell into a comfortable pattern. Lord Aldrich attended the King's Council during the mornings, while I worked on the accounts and surveys he left for me. We took our midday meal together, discussing what I'd found and what needed further investigation. Afternoons were spent in preparation for when the assessor's report returned, gathering additional evidence, identifying potential witnesses, strengthening the case for my separation from Gareth. Father Benedict visited regularly, ostensibly to ensure propriety was being maintained, but I suspected he also came because he enjoyed our conversations. He was a learned man, well versed in philosophy and law, and he challenged me to think deeply about what I wanted my life to become after this ordeal ended. "Freedom is not an end in itself, child," he said one afternoon as we sat by the fire. "It is a beginning. The question you must answer is, freedom for what purpose? What will you do with your independence once it's won?" It was a question I'd been avoiding, focusing instead on the immediate battle. But Father Benedict's words forced me to look beyond the present conflict to the life that would follow. "I want to matter," I said slowly, testing the words. "I want to use my life for something more than just surviving. I want to manage my estate well, care for my tenants properly, perhaps even, make a difference somehow." "A worthy ambition," Father Benedict said. "But remember, Alain, making a difference doesn't require grand gestures. Sometimes it's as simple as treating people with dignity, seeing their worth when others overlook them. You've experienced what it means to be overlooked and diminished. Let that guide how you treat others." His words stayed with me, shaping how I thought about the future. I didn't need to do something extraordinary. I just needed to do what was right, to be the kind of person who made the world slightly better rather than worse. The royal assessor returned on the 13th day, accompanied by Lord Aldrich and looking grave. They arrived in the late afternoon, and I knew from Lord Aldrich's expression that the news was significant. My heart hammered as they entered the chambers, and I rose from my work at the desk. "Lady Alain," the assessor said, bowing slightly. He was a thin man with sharp features and the ink-stained fingers of someone who spent his days with ledgers. "I am Master Corin, Royal Assessor to His Majesty. I have completed my inspection of your estate." "Please," I said, gesturing to the chairs by the fire. "Tell me what you found." We settled, and Master Corin withdrew a thick sheaf of documents from his leather case. "I must tell you, my lady, that what I discovered was deeply troubling. Your estate has been systematically stripped of its resources over the past 3 years. The words hit me like a physical blow. Stripped? The timber forests have been clear-cut beyond sustainability, entire groves removed with no thought for replanting. The mill is in disrepair, its wheel damaged, and the building itself showing signs of neglect. Several tenant cottages have fallen into ruin, yet your husband continued to collect full rents from families forced to live in deteriorating conditions." Lord Aldrich's expression darkened as Master Corin continued. "The accounts show excessive rents extracted from tenants, far above what the land could reasonably support. Many families have fallen into debt to your husband, debt he has used to bind them more tightly to the estate. And the profits from all of this, and there were considerable profits, have been moved elsewhere. Not invested back into the land, but transferred to your husband's personal holdings. I felt sick. He's been destroying my mother's legacy." "More than that," Master Corin said quietly. "He's been using your inheritance to enrich himself while letting the estate itself deteriorate. In my professional assessment, if this continues for another 2 years, The land will be worthless. The tenants will abandon it, the soil will be exhausted, and there will be nothing left to salvage. And the tenants? I asked, thinking of the families who had lived on that land for generations. What did they say? Master Corin's expression softened slightly. They spoke highly of your mother, my lady. They remember her fairness and kindness, and they spoke less favorably of your husband. Several were willing to testify to his harsh treatment and excessive demands. They want you to come home, to restore what your mother built. Tears stung my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Can it be saved? The estate? With proper management and investment, yes, but it will take years to undo the damage. The forests will need replanting, the mill repairs, the tenant cottages rebuilding. It's not impossible, but it will require dedication and resources. I'll do it, I said without hesitation. Whatever it takes, I'll restore what he's destroyed. Lord Aldrich reached over and squeezed my hand briefly. You won't do it alone. Master Corin's report was presented to the king the following morning. This time, when we entered the throne room, I felt less like a supplicant and more like someone demanding justice. The evidence was irrefutable. Gareth had violated his duties as steward of my lands, enriching himself while destroying my inheritance. Gareth stood before the throne, his face pale and tense. He'd clearly heard rumors of what the assessor had found, and his earlier bluster had given way to barely controlled panic. The king read through Master Corin's report in silence, his expression growing darker with each page. Finally, he set the documents aside and fixed Gareth with a look of cold contempt. Lord Millbrook, I have rarely seen such a damning account of estate mismanagement. You have violated every principle of stewardship, treating your wife's inheritance as plunder to be stripped rather than property to be maintained. The king's voice rang through the hall. What have you to say in your defense? Gareth straightened, attempting to regain some dignity. Your Majesty, I managed the estate as I saw fit. As her husband, the lands were mine to— The lands were never yours, the king interrupted. They were held in trust through your marriage, but they remained your wife's inheritance. You had a duty to preserve them, not destroy them for your own enrichment. I extracted no more than was reasonable. Master Corin's report proves otherwise. You charged rents 50% above customary rates. You sold timber that should have been preserved for future generations. You neglected basic repairs and maintenance while transferring thousands in profits to your personal accounts. The king leaned forward. You have failed in every duty a husband owes his wife, every obligation a lord owes his tenants. You are unfit to manage these lands. Gareth's face flushed dark red. Your Majesty, you cannot simply take a man's property. They are not your property. The king's voice cracked like a whip. They never were. And I am not taking them from you. I am returning them to their rightful owner. The throne room fell silent. I felt Lord Aldrich's steady presence beside me, anchoring me as the king pronounced judgment. Lady Elewen of Thornwood, I hereby grant you full separation from Gareth of Millbrook. Your marriage is dissolved by royal decree. Your inherited lands are returned to your sole control, free from any claim your former husband might make. Lord Millbrook will provide financial compensation for the damages he has inflicted upon your estate, an amount to be determined by Master Corin based on the cost of repairs and restoration. Gareth made a strangled sound of protest, but the king silenced him with a raised hand. Furthermore, Lord Millbrook, you are forbidden from contacting or approaching Lady Elewen under penalty of imprisonment. You will have no claim on her property, her person, or her future. Do I make myself clear? This is an outrage, Gareth said, but his voice had lost its conviction. You cannot— I can and I have. One more word of protest, and I will add charges of contempt to your growing list of failures. The king's gaze was merciless. You are dismissed. Gareth stood frozen for a moment, then turned and strode from the throne room. He didn't look at me as he passed, but I felt the weight of his fury like a physical force. It should have frightened me, but all I felt was an overwhelming sense of relief. It was over. I was free. "Lady Elowen," the king said, and I realized he was addressing me directly. "You have shown remarkable courage in bringing this matter before me. I trust you will prove an able steward of your lands, honoring your mother's legacy." I curtsied deeply. "I will do my utmost, Your Majesty." "Thank you for your justice. Thank Lord Aldrich and Father Benedict. They made your case compellingly." The king's expression softened slightly. "Go home, Lady Elowen. Restore what has been damaged, and know that you have the crown's support should you need it." We left the throne room in a daze, my mind struggling to accept that it was truly finished. Lord Aldrich guided me back to his chambers with Torvin trailing behind, and once the door was closed, the reality of it finally crashed over me. I was free, truly, completely free. I turned to Lord Aldrich, emotions overwhelming me. "I don't know how to thank you. You've given me back my life." "You gave yourself your life back," he corrected gently. "I simply stood beside you while you did it. You did more than that, and you know it." I wanted to say more, to tell him how much his support had meant, how his belief in me had helped me believe in myself, but the words tangled in my throat, too large and unwieldy to express properly. "When will you leave for your estate?" he asked, and I heard something in his voice, not quite reluctance, but a heaviness that mirrored my own feelings. "I should go soon. The tenants need to see that things are changing, that I'm taking control." I moved to the window, looking out over the castle courtyard. But I find myself reluctant. Why? Because leaving meant leaving you, I thought. Because these 2 weeks in your chambers have shown me what it means to be valued, respected, seen as an equal. Because I'm not ready to lose that yet. But I couldn't say those things. I just won my freedom. I couldn't immediately surrender it by admitting I'd developed feelings for my protector. That would make everything we'd fought for seem less genuine, would reduce our relationship to something shallow and dependent. "Because it's frightening," I said instead, which was also true. "I'll be alone, responsible for everything. What if I fail? What if I can't restore what Gareth destroyed?" Lord Aldrich came to stand beside me at the window. "You won't be alone unless you choose to be. You'll have a steward, servants, tenants who want to help. And you'll have friends who will support you from a distance." Friends. The word was careful, neutral, offering support without overstepping. I should have been grateful for his discretion. Instead, I felt a sharp pang of disappointment. "Will you visit?" I asked. "Once I'm settled?" "If you wish it, yes." And the days before my departure passed too quickly. Lord Aldrich helped me hire a competent steward, a man named Roland, who had managed estates in the north and came with excellent references. Together, we reviewed the accounts, planned the restoration work, and prepared for my return to lands I hadn't seen in 3 years. Father Benedict blessed my journey and promised to visit once I was settled. "You've been through a crucible, child," he said. "What emerges from fire is either destroyed or tempered into something stronger. You have been tempered." On my final evening in Lord Aldrich's chambers, we shared a quiet meal by the fire. Neither of us spoke much. There seemed to be too much to say, and no adequate words to say it. The silence was comfortable but heavy with unspoken feelings. "I have something for you," Lord Aldrich said finally, rising to retrieve a small wooden box from his desk. He handed it to me, and I opened it to find a delicate silver pendant on a fine chain, a bird in flight, wings spread wide. "It was Morelle's," he said quietly. "She wore it always. Said it reminded her that even caged birds could dream of flight. I want you to have it, to remember that you've earned your freedom and no one can take it from you again. Tears blurred my vision as I lifted the pendant from the box. I can't accept this. It's too precious. Which is why I want you to have it. He took the necklace and moved behind me, fastening it around my neck with careful fingers. Morel would have wanted you to have something of hers. And I want you to have a reminder that you're not alone, even when you feel like you are. The pendant settled against my collarbone, warm from his touch. I turned to face him and found him standing closer than I'd expected, his gray eyes intense in the firelight. "Aldrich," I said, using his given name for the first time, "I don't know how to say goodbye to you." "Then don't." His hand came up to cup my cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear I hadn't realized had fallen. "This isn't goodbye, Alawan. It's just until we meet again." The moment stretched between us, charged with possibility. I could lean forward, close the small distance between us, see if the connection I felt was real or imagined. But I held back, recognizing that this wasn't the right time. I needed to go to my estate, to prove to myself that I could stand alone before I chose to stand beside someone. "Until we meet again," I echoed softly. He lowered his hand, and the moment passed. But something had been acknowledged between us, something that could wait until I was truly ready to explore it. The next morning, I departed from my estate with Roland and a small escort Lord Aldrich had arranged. As the castle receded behind us, I touched the silver bird at my throat and allowed myself to hope that freedom didn't have to mean loneliness. Not forever. The estate looked worse than I'd imagined. The timber forests Master Corin had described were scarred landscapes, stumps stretching as far as I could see where ancient trees had once stood. The mill sat silent and broken, its wheel listing to one side. Several tenant cottages showed gaps in their thatch roofs, walls leaning at precarious angles. But the tenants themselves lined the road to greet me, hope written on their weathered faces. An elderly woman stepped forward. I recognized her as Agnes, who had served my mother. "Lady Elowen," she said, her voice trembling, "welcome home. We've been praying for your return." Home. The words settled around me like a mantle, heavy with responsibility, but also with possibility. This was mine now, to restore, to nurture, to make flourish again. "Thank you, Agnes," I said, dismounting from my horse. "I know there's much work to be done, but we'll do it together, the way my mother would have wanted." Over the following weeks, I threw myself into the restoration work. Roland proved invaluable, his experience and steady temperament exactly what I needed. We assessed the damage, prioritized repairs, and began the slow process of rebuilding. The mill was repaired first. It was essential for grinding grain and generating income. Then we turned to the tenant cottages, ensuring everyone had safe, weatherproof shelter before winter arrived. The forests would take decades to restore, but we began planting saplings, creating nurseries for future growth. I met with each tenant family, listening to their concerns, adjusting rents to fair levels, releasing them from the debts Gareth had imposed. Slowly, cautiously, trust began to build. I discovered I had a talent for estate management, just as Lord Aldrich had suggested. The work engaged my mind and gave me purpose. Each decision I made, each problem I solved, reinforced that I was capable, that Gareth's 3 years of criticism had been lies designed to control me. Letters arrived regularly from Lord Aldrich, updating me on court matters and asking after my progress. I wrote back, telling him about the repairs, the challenges, the small victories. Our correspondence was carefully proper, but beneath the formal language, I sensed the same connection we'd felt that last night in his chambers. Father Benedict visited in late autumn, as he'd promised. He walked the estate with me, blessing the restored mill and the new cottages, speaking encouragement to the tenants. As we stood overlooking the scarred forests, he said, "You've done well, child. Your mother would be proud." "I hope so," I said. Some days, I feel like I'm barely keeping ahead of the work. There's so much still to do. There always is. But you're not running from challenges anymore. You're facing them. That's growth." He paused, then added, "Lord Aldrich asks after you in every letter I receive from him." Heat rose in my cheeks. "He's a good friend." "He's a good man who cares for you deeply," Father Benedict corrected gently. "The question is, how do you feel about him?" I was quiet for a long moment, watching the wind move through the remaining trees. I care for him too, but I needed time to become myself again, to prove I could stand on my own. I won't trade one dependence for another, even if the second man is infinitely better than the first. Wise. But remember, Alain, choosing to be with someone is not the same as depending on them. Partnership between equals is not dependence. It's multiplication of strength. His words stayed with me through the winter months as I continued the restoration work. Spring arrived, bringing new life to the planted saplings and hope for better harvests. The estate was thriving again, not yet what it had been under my mother's care, but moving in that direction. And then, on a bright morning in early spring, a rider appeared on the road, a tall figure on a dark horse, moving with the confident bearing I'd recognize anywhere. Lord Aldrich had come. I met him in the courtyard, my heart pounding in a way that had nothing to do with exertion. He dismounted and stood before me, his gray eyes warm as they took in my appearance. I'd changed in the months since leaving his chambers. My hands were calloused from work, my skin sun-touched from hours outdoors, my frame stronger from physical labor. I was no longer the frightened woman who'd fled into his chambers that night. "Lady Elowen," he said formally, but his smile was genuine. "Your estate looks well. I can see you've accomplished much." "Lord Aldrich." I found myself returning his smile. "Welcome. Will you stay? Let me show you what we've done." We spent the day walking the estate, and I found myself talking eagerly about the repairs, the replanting, the tenants' renewed hope. Lord Aldrich listened attentively, asked intelligent questions, offered suggestions born from his own experience. But beneath the practical discussion, I felt the current of something deeper, the connection we'd acknowledged but not acted upon. That evening, after a simple meal with Roland and the household, Lord Aldrich and I walked in the gardens my mother had planted. They'd fallen into neglect under Gareth's management, but I'd begun restoring them, and the first spring flowers were blooming. "Why did you come?" I asked as we paused beside a budding rose bush. "To see how you were managing, to assure myself you were well." He turned to face me fully. "And because I've missed you, Elowen. These months without you have been difficult." My heart soared at his words. "I've missed you too. Your letters sustained me through the hardest days." "Then why did you never ask me to visit?" His voice was gentle but searching. "I would have come any time you wished it. Because I needed to prove something to myself first." I touched the silver bird pendant I still wore every day. I needed to know I could stand alone, that I was whole and capable on my own. If I'd called you here before I was sure of that, I'd always wonder if I was with you because I needed you, or because I chose you. Understanding dawned in his eyes. "And now?" "Now I know," I said, my voice steady despite the emotion swelling in my chest. "I can stand alone. I've proven that to myself and everyone else. But I've also learned something equally important. Standing alone isn't always strength. Sometimes strength is knowing when to let someone stand beside you." Lord Aldrich took a step closer, his hand reaching for mine. His calloused fingers intertwined with my own work-roughened ones, a perfect fit of equals who had both known labor and purpose. "I'm not the same man who offered you shelter that night," he said quietly. "Helping you fight for your freedom changed me. It reminded me that power and privilege mean nothing if they're not used to lift others. You gave me purpose again, showed me a kind of courage I'd forgotten existed." "And I'm not the same woman who stumbled into your chambers," I replied. You showed me what I could be, not through controlling me or diminishing me, but by believing in me when I couldn't believe in myself. So where does that leave us? He asked, though his eyes suggested he already knew. I looked up at him. This man who had stood beside me through my darkest hours, who had never asked for anything in return, who had let me go when I needed space and come back when I was ready. It leaves us here in this moment with a choice to make. And what choice is that? Whether we want to face the future alone or together. I squeezed his hand. I'm choosing together, Aldrich. If you'll have me, not as someone who needs protection, but as an equal partner. His other hand came up to cradle my face, and this time I didn't hold back. I leaned into his touch, feeling the rightness of it settle into my bones. I would be honored, he said softly, to be your partner, your equal, your friend, and, if you're willing, eventually your husband. But only when you're ready. Only when you're certain. I'm certain, I whispered. I've had months to think about what I want my life to be. And I want it to include you, not because I need you, but because I choose you. There's a difference. All the difference in the world, he agreed. Then he kissed me, gentle and careful, as if I were something precious. And perhaps I was, not fragile, but valuable, worthy of tenderness without being treated as weak. When we pulled apart, I was smiling, truly smiling, in a way I hadn't in years. So what now? Now we take our time, Aldrich said, his own smile matching mine. We court properly, let people see that this is real and not some scandal. You continue building your estate, I continue serving the king, and we see each other as often as we can manage. And eventually, if we both still choose it, we marry. Combine our estates, build something together that's stronger than either of us alone. He touched the silver bird at my throat. Morel would have loved seeing her pendant on you. She would have loved knowing that something good came from her pain. Tears stung my eyes, but they were good tears this time. I'll honor her memory every day, I promise you that. I know you will. He pulled me close, and I rested my head against his chest, hearing the steady beat of his heart. You've already honored it, Alowan. By refusing to let Gareth break you, by fighting for your freedom, by becoming the strong, capable woman you are. That's the greatest tribute to Morel anyone could offer. We stood there in the garden as twilight descended, two people who had found each other in darkness and chosen to walk toward light together. My journey from that terrified woman fleeing her cruel marriage to this moment had been long and painful, but also transformative. I had learned that freedom wasn't just about escaping. It was about becoming, about choosing, about building a life worth living. And I had learned that love, real love, didn't diminish or control. It multiplied strength, celebrated growth, and offered partnership without demanding surrender. As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, I thought about the future stretching ahead, years of work to fully restore the estate, seasons of courtship with Aldrich, eventually a marriage built on mutual respect and genuine affection. There would be challenges, certainly. Society would gossip about my dissolved first marriage, about my relationship with Lord Aldrich. Some would always see me as the woman who defied her husband rather than the woman who claimed her freedom. But I had faced Gareth and won. I had stood before the king and spoken my truth. I had taken broken lands and begun their healing. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I would face them not with fear, but with the quiet confidence of someone who knew her own worth. Thank you, I said to Aldrich, for seeing me when I couldn't see myself. Thank you, he replied, for reminding me why honor and justice matter, for showing me that sometimes the greatest battles are fought in quiet chambers and throne rooms, with words and courage rather than swords. We turned back toward the house as full night fell, walking side by side, neither leading nor following but moving together. Behind us, the gardens continued their slow return to beauty. Before us, the restored estate stood as testimony to what could be rebuilt from ruins. And above us, stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, indifferent to human struggles, but beautiful nonetheless. I touched the silver bird at my throat one last time, thinking of Morel, of my mother, of all the women who had dreamed of flight. Their dreams lived on in me now, not just as memory, but as reality. I had escaped the cage, I had learned to fly, and I had chosen freely and fully to share that flight with someone who would soar beside me rather than clip my wings. The future was uncertain, as all futures are, but it was mine to shape, mine to claim, mine to live, and that made all the difference.